Hello and welcome to episode 28 of the Large Format Photography Podcast. My name is Simon Forster and I'm joined by Andrew Bartram and Svein Olav Humberset. Hello, Andrew.
Hello, Simon.
Hello, Svein.
Hello.
Right, first off, I just want to say thank you to Borut, Peter Lynn of Top Ship Photography for being our guest on the last podcast. I didn't think I was going to say that again, but I had to. Borut, it was an absolute pleasure having you on with us, and actually I'm going to start us off on a slightly down note because I've just watched Borut's latest video, and it's a farewell to Mike, his dog, and it's it's 2 minutes and 30 seconds or so of very emotional viewing. It's a tough watch, but it's well worth watching as well. I hope you're doing okay, Boris, and thanks for sharing those thoughts and last moments with Mike. So let's move on and find out what Andrew's been up to.
Aren't you going to ask me what the weather's like in Warboys?
No. We don't do that on the Classic Lenses podcast.
No, I know.
We've actually
have you stopped that?
We seem to have done. Yeah, it's ages since I've asked Johnny what the weather in Chicago's like. So there you go.
Well, maybe you should start it up again. He's probably missing it.
Yeah.
Well, it's not much has happened since I last spoke to you. In fact, that was yesterday. But in terms of the show, what have I been up to? I've been reading quite a lot. I've been exposing some film, not a sheet of large format film, I have to say. I've been in the darkroom making some lith prints. And what else? I've written a blog post. And I've got some more pictures I scanned from an Olympus trip, which is also not large format, and I'm going to make a blog post with that as well. So I like making blog posts. It gives me an outlet for those images that you kind of accumulate, and you think, well, what am I going to do with those? They may be not anything I want to print, or they could be color, and yet they maybe tell a bit of a story in a way that individual images don't speak to me. So I've got a series from a trip to Liverpool, and the one or two images are quite strong. A lot of them are quite kind of boring, but together they tell us a story of the day. And so a blog post, I think, is a good way to put that together, even if it's just for my own sanity and no one reads it. But a few people read it.
Yeah. I think there's definitely something. There's a lot to be said for that, because I've certainly heard it said that when you understand something, when you write about something, that's not necessarily about just photography or art or anything, but writing about something or teaching about something that enables you to learn more about what it is that you've done and get the word out there, really, isn't it?
Yeah, the big one which I'm holding off doing because I've got so many images. And I've alluded to it online a couple of times. I spent my first 2 weeks of when I was properly locked down due to thinking I was ill. I dug out my Diana F, so not one of the original Dianas, although I do have one of those, the one with a flash. And I stuck a roll of Portra 160 into it and started shooting around the house of all kinds of mundane stuff. And then as the weather improved, I started just venturing into the garden, and Julie was doing stuff out there, and I started shooting with it, and I developed the first roll, and I really liked the kind of quirky results. And I've now got 60 scanned images telling a 2 week story of the mundane, and they're all shot through this Diana F, which I'd not really used before, and everything was set on the closest setting. Most of them have areas that are in focus, I've been thinking of the words to go with the images, and I think it's going to be really kind of cathartic for me for those periods and for this whole period to try and look at life through this kind of distorted lens. The colours aren't quite there. Everything's a bit odd, the normal suddenly becomes the abnormal, and I think those pictures are speaking to me in a way that sort of expresses how I was feeling in that time. So I want to make a blog post of that, but really what I want to do is edit them a little bit and make my first zine, because I've not done one of those. So that's another little project for me, which makes me happy.
Yeah. So Svein, I mean, you're very much project driven. Do you write about your work as well as create zines and things?
No, I try to stay away from it, because for me there is a reason why I do photography, and that's partly because I can't do anything else pretty well. So the writing is just horrible for me. Writing about my own work, writing about cameras or reviews or anything, it doesn't work at all. So that's me.
Yeah. I get where you're coming from, because I'm pretty much the same, and you could argue part of that is dyslexia, but that's not. I don't think that's really a good enough reason, because I can get onto a computer and I can type things out that people can understand and get my spellings right and all that kind of stuff. But I do sometimes find there's a huge mental block for me to do things, and actually that's I'm gonna jump ahead slightly about something that I've been up to, and I was asked to write a foreword to a photo book which I've talked about before on the show, and it's called The Unknown Spain, and I've forgotten the chap's name. I'll remember his name at some point. But
so what's it called, Simon? The
Unknown Spain. Actually, I'm just going to.
What, as in the country?
Yeah. I'm just grabbing the book now, and the copy I have is a German, mainly German language, and it was sent through to me, and I'm going to have to find the email now. And
is this where the author refers to you as the knowledgeable Simon Forster?
That's right. Yeah, I've got knowledgeable and large format photography used in the same sentence. I don't know if he's removed that bit now, but let's see. I should have had this. Chris Holland. I knew his name was Chris. I couldn't quite remember his surname, but Chris Holland is a chap behind a website. And he's digitized. I don't know if it's all of it, or certainly most of the pictures in this photo book. It was taken during the First World War, and it was a German photographer, Heischler, going through Spain, documenting just ordinary life, and it's an absolutely fascinating book. But the point I'm making, where that Svein has set me off, is that when I was asked to write a foreword for it, I was thinking, I think I know what I need to write, but to actually get to the point of actually writing it, it was really, really tough for me, and it wasn't until Chris had written in to the Classic Lenses podcast and mentioned it, and I had to read something out on the show, thinking, well, I'm going to have to do something now, because this podcast is going out, and I've already mentioned that I've written the foreword, so therefore I've got to do it. So sometimes I have to put a huge amount of pressure on myself to do anything like that, and that's exactly what happened there. So I managed to knock this forward up in a relatively short period of time, and Chris was happy with it. So happy with it. It's out there now, and I'm going to try and find the website. It's on. Here we go. He managed to snag a really good website for it as well, because it's just large-format-photography.org. And
really?
and if you exactly, he was quite surprised to get it himself, and so he's got that, and then you'll find that, and then if you go to the intro page, it's got Simon Forster, host of the Large Format Photography podcast, was so kind to provide a knowledgeable introduction to this subject. So there you go. Well, Chris thought I was knowledgeable, and that's very nice. Thank you very much, Chris. I appreciate that. But I do urge you to go out and take a look at that. as it's a pretty fascinating book. So I'm sorry, I've just completely derailed things there, but I felt I had to get that out.
No, it's what you've been up. It's what you've been up to, isn't it?
Yeah, well, but
you've been buying cameras as well, haven't you? I know you've been buying cameras, or at least a camera.
Well, yeah. I was just going to say, because I cut you off in your prime there a little bit. Have you got any other things that you wanted to say that you've been up to, or
me?
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
I've finished.
Okay. Well, yes, it's a well-known fact that we've established many times on this show that the more cameras you have, the better the photographer you are.
Or you keep buying cameras as a reason to not go out and make any pictures.
Yeah, I might have got that wrong. It's quite possible. I did that with lenses once, and now I'm doing it with large format cameras, it seems. Because since the last show, I've still not taken any photographs. I've still not fixed the MPP micro press cameras bed, which all I need to do is just take a few screws out and put them back in the right order, and I think it'll be okay. But instead of doing that, I bought a camera instead, because that's obviously the thing that needed to be done. And I bought a Kodak Specialist Model B, and it's fantastic. I mean, I just love the engineering of cameras anyway. At the end of the day, they're just fantastic objects. But I picked this one up. It's a physical auction that I couldn't physically go to, and it's a half plate camera. I was hoping that it might actually be a 7x5, but no, it's half plate, and it's also got a reducing back that goes down to 3 1/4 by 2 1/4. I can never quite remember the size. Which one is it? Is it 3 1/4?
Pass.
Yeah, 3 and something by 2 and something.
You mean the knowledgeable Simon Forster doesn't know the answer to that question?
Well, the thing is that technically, as we've established, isn't actually large format. You see, so that's why I don't know the answer to that.
Oh, it's near enough.
Yeah,
it's near enough.
Yeah.
Well, what's the size?
That's the thing. It's 3 1/4 by 2 1/4, I think, or something and 3/4.
Oh, we're not going to reopen that argument, Svein, about what's large format and what isn't.
No,
we don't really care.
No, I was thinking, what's the size in centimeters? Because I don't understand the quarter and the
right.
thing.
Yeah, we were having this discussion off air about photographic paper, and I was talking about my standard size of 9.5 by 12.
It's going to be.
Svein wanted to talk to me about centimeters.
Well, I think 3 inches is about 75 mil, I think. So a bit more than that. So put maybe about 80 millimeter wide on the long side.
Okay, so you need to cut. There is no film for it, or
you can actually get some film. Actually, the second mention for AG Photographic, they've got some film. I can't remember if it's. I think they've got some FP4. I think in that size. I mean, it's virtually you can get backs for the cameras that are meant to take that size and use 120 film on them normally. Which I suppose you could do with this, but it would just be ridiculous. But the thing is massive because it's a half plate camera, and half plate is a smidge smaller than 7x5, but it is definitely smaller than 7x5 because I've had the tape measure on there, and it will not do 7x5. It's about 6x6 in inches at least. Sorry, Svein.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, it's a big beast of a camera, and it's made of wood, but it's come with its case, but it's also come with proper relatively modern film holders as well. Because when I've seen half plate cameras in the past, they've usually been mahogany things, and whereas these are recognizable as relatively modern double dark slide film holders. So, but you can get again AG Photographic have got Fomapan in half plate, and it's the same size. The same price, I should say, as 7x5 film. Yeah, it's slightly smaller than 7x5, but it's the same price. And I'm now beginning to think I might have to have a go at it.
I keep. Well, I don't keep because I've got to stay away from eBay. But when I've been on eBay in recent weeks, I've looked at some, some of the plate cameras, quarter plate, half plate cameras, and I'm thinking, Jason Lane makes his dry plates for it, and I wasn't aware that AG Photo sold some film that would fit one of those. But there's some nice cameras out there. I'm not an expert by any means, but I've just, from what I can see, there are some, even on eBay, there's some quite reasonably priced cameras which would give you a way in, to large format photography. Well, just that the film is not so readily available or the choice of film perhaps isn't so readily available.
Well, the surprising thing about this one to me was the fact that it is relatively modern and still half plate. This camera was made in the 50s. In my little mind, I thought that half plate would have died out after the First World War or something like that, because when you type in half plate cameras, they're always brass mahogany with maybe a Thornton Pickard shutter on the front of them. But
Gandolfi were probably still making half plate cameras until certainly into the 60s and 70s. There's a couple of documentaries with them making their cameras. So I think those brothers, the Gandolfi brothers, were still probably making them into that period of time.
Yeah, well, it's a hefty piece of kit, and it's got a Kodak Ektar lens on it, which always makes me happy because I like Ektar lenses.
And what are you going to do with this camera then? You've got the other one. Sorry, but you've got the other one that I had sitting down by my desk for a long time, and you seem to have more cameras now than fingers.
It does seem that way. That the old one, which that we don't actually know who made it, but I called it Harold quite some time ago, and I still haven't had the nerve to use that one, much in the same way as you didn't have the nerve to use it. Although you've now put some film in it and some extra film in it.
Did I actually load? I'm not sure I loaded.
You didn't, did you?
No, I've given you the film. I cut some X-ray film down.
Yeah.
A dozen sheets or so, and they're in a black bag with the camera.
Yeah, and still there, right next to the camera.
Well, that makes me feel a bit better because I felt a bit guilty about not doing anything with it because I was scared.
Yeah. Well,
I was scared of breaking it because I know you'd showed me how to.
Yeah, it's a bit rickety. Definitely.
The shutter I was scared about breaking, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, not having access to the 6 times darkroom is part of my excuse for not doing anything with it at the moment. So I can't really load it very easily. So, but no, I do want to use it, much as like I want to use all my cameras. And I don't know. I do seem to be more likely to use this, and I think if I do actually end up getting shelling out for some half plate film, I think it's about £65 for 100 on foam, £1 100. So that's pretty damn reasonable, really, for the size of the negative, and I can 3D print a negative holder to go in the DeVere 7x5 and larger that we've got, that one day I'll be able to use again. So there's no real reason for me not to try it now. I can even develop it with my Combi Plan stuff, I think. So yeah, we'll get there. We'll take photos again.
Well, thanks for that, Simon. I think you've got far too many cameras and you need to stop it now. I think you buy them because you think you're going to sell them, don't you? Or maybe you think you're going to use them. I don't know. But you justify the purchase on the basis that you're a photographic dealer of hubcaps or something. So, yeah, well, we think a lot about photography in these days of lockdown. So, Svein, in these days of lockdown, what have you been up to since we last spoke to you?
Well, not much really. I haven't done any photography. I had one trip where I saw the weather forecast and just planned to take a half a day at this mountain. And when I got there, it was just clear blue skies, and particularly this mountain don't have any trees or anything on it. So after the first sort of 5 minutes, there were nothing left to shoot. So it sort of ended up being a non-photographic trip, and that was the the trip I had where I listened to the episode with Borut, and that made me sort of chill out about the whole thing about coming home with sort of four images on a 120 roll, and I was totally fine with it after listening to Borut and realizing that even though I just sort of have a half a day every now and then, I can't create a masterpiece in half a day. So I just have to relax about the process and just take my time and enjoy it, and sort of stress as little as possible when it comes to photography. So that's the only photography that I've done, but I've prepared a lot for other stuff, other projects. I've tried to paint my own background for some still life in order to...
Is that house you painted?
No. No, we of course we decided to paint the house too on top of everything. So, but I just found two sort of uncut mat boards and just put one on the table and one on the taped one to the wall. And I just started with acrylic paint, just laid the first base coat of black, and then I'm sort of going to build up some contours and textures and with gray and some clay, and just going at it, just see what it does on black and white film with some tilts and some shifts and some grain and some loveliness. So I have no idea what I'm going to photograph, but I had this idea in my head that since I don't know, I should just photograph everything and then just see what looks cool after I develop it. So
I'm a bit confused.
That's okay.
Which is a normal state of affairs for me, to be honest.
After talking to me.
No, I just go through life being slightly confused. I played a character once in my last dramatic outing as a stage actor. I played a character that was so close to my normal state of being that I found it very easy. Somebody who just didn't really understand much and was confused all the time. So what you need to just describe this thing that you've been painting. Are you building like a model of something to photograph, or is this meant to be a backdrop to put things into photograph?
Oh yeah, it's meant to be a backdrop, but I don't want it to be like a pure color. I want there to be some sort of texture. So, for instance, if I photograph something very small, if I find a Lego figure or whatever, I can sort of I can build up some contours and textures in the background and see if when I shoot it on a large format with tiny depth of field, if those contours in the background sort of resembles mountains because my subject is so small. I don't know. I have to test it.
You can play. I tell you what, you can play with. Ben Horn certainly spoke about it. You can employ a bit of back tilt if your camera. This brings us on to what camera you're using. Bit of back tilt. I think if you're tilting it towards you, it makes the image with a bit of other focusing manipulation. It alters the relative size in the viewfinder of the thing that's close to you, so it makes it more dominant. So it'll make your Lego soldier appear bigger. But you can play.
Yeah,
it's fun. There's lots of YouTube videos out there. I'm sure we spoke about these in the early days about him photographing. The one I always remember watching is the guy in his studio who was using a monorail camera, because obviously that's something with a whole bag of different movements and very useful in the studio. And he was photographing as an exercise on YouTube a cornflake box or a cereal box, and using that shape, demonstrating how using the Scheimpflug principle you can get all planes of focus. You can get all sides of the box in focus by various camera movements. So,
yeah,
it's good to play.
I think
I tend to do all that playing out in the field. Really, I haven't really got a lot of patience for still life, to be honest.
I've watched so many YouTube videos, but I haven't done any sort of actual learning myself. So I think that's probably one of my biggest issues, is that I have quite a lot of sort of theoretical knowledge, but I don't have any practical. I don't use those techniques in the field because maybe I don't remember how to, or the scene doesn't call for it. So it's I think it will be good for me to sort of have a still life and have one sheet where I do this and I do something else on the next sheet, and then if I photograph something bigger than a Lego piece, maybe like a box of biscuits or whatever, I can imagine if this company someday wants to break out on the norm and have an advertising that is completely different than anything else on the market, and so they call me. So I sort of imagine that, and then I try to do my black and white large format movements with contours and smoke and my homemade background, etc. And so it's just it's a fun experiment to both learn about the principles and the movements, and then sort of maybe ending up with some future ideas. I don't think that a box of biscuits will sort of spur something else, but I don't know.
Placing it at 45 degrees, so the corners facing you, is a really good exercise then for trying to adjust your plane of focus to follow the line of the wording, say on the side of the box. So it's if you're playing around with those sort of things is very instructive. For most of my photography, I don't know about you, Simon, but if I'm out in the landscape with large format, which is largely what I'm using it for, most of my images, there's a small amount of front tilt, just to ensure front to back sharpness, and then I just have to adjust focus again, and I just fiddle with it until everything's sharp from front to back, and that's largely it. Sometimes then, if I've got a building, and I'm standing obliquely to it, I'll try and get the film. You can move the film plane to try and be in line with the building, or you can swing the front lens in the direction of the angle of the building, and then see how that affects the plane of focus. And then if you want to, you can try and visualize that as, in terms of where the Scheinflug principle, or get your books out and go back to school.
Yeah, I'm largely the same as yourself there, except I probably don't do any swing at all. So it's just a little bit of front, but I think I've just got Svein's Flickr page in front of me at the moment, and you looking at the photographs I see on there, they are straight on photographs. I don't think I'd even use any front tilt at all on those photographs. So it could be something to do with just the type of subject matter that you're taking, Svein. But certainly, I think that as an exercise, doing still life is incredibly useful, because those of us, and I absolutely count myself in there, those of us that have got a bit of an idea about what these camera movements are doing. If when you start doing still life and anything that's close to the camera, then you have to use movements, otherwise you're just going to end up with things that are out of focus that you want to be in focus, and so it gives you a great opportunity, if you like, to learn your movements in a very controlled way. I mean, you can take the shot, take note of what movements that you had. I mean, you could even put something in the photograph to say what it is that you're doing in the camera. just to give you that aid memoir when you're actually developing your photos, to actually see, well, okay, what did I do in this shot? Oh, it tells me, because I've actually got it in the photograph to actually read. So that's another way forward. So I'm now thinking, that sounds like a good idea. I might do that. Now I've come up with it.
Yeah, I did some film testing where at first I didn't do that. And then I had to sort of remember the order of in the tanks, and the bottom film is this. And that when I hanged it, I had to write on the clip just to keep everything correct. But of course, if you have a piece of paper where it says Fomapan 400 Rodinal 1 plus whatever in the frame, you don't have to think about anything. You just develop them all, develop, and then just look at the images.
Yeah. I mean, there's always a feeling that, well, it's like wasting a photograph, and I think it's if you do have that feeling, well, don't. Because ultimately it's about gaining knowledge, and every time we take a photograph, a conventional photograph, something that we plan to take and so on, it's still part of a learning experience when you actually see the photograph, how it's actually come out and finished. We'll look at the photograph and we'll analyze it, and we'll know, yeah, that worked or it didn't work. And so you're still thinking about these photographs after you've taken a conventional photograph. So by putting that information in front of you, it's just speeding up that learning process, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'm thinking that this I want to have a body of work of still life images sometime in the future, but I have no idea how and what's going to look like and what's the subject matter and stuff. But so I can either just sort of do conventional landscape photography for years and then just suddenly have an epiphany and then do a still life project, or I can slowly, like whenever there's a pandemic, I can sort of bring out the monorail and sort of use the time that I have and just try new stuff. And I imagine that when I try some movements, I bet you I'm going to get an idea after I see the images of how to sort of implement that in landscape photography or portraits or whatever down the road. And so for me, it's just a learning experience. And actually the worst thing that can happen is that I sort of hit the nail on the head on the first try and get something amazing, because then I would just have that amazing image in my mind from that point on. And I don't want that yet. I want to work on it. I want to do like 50 sheets maybe before I sort of see where I want to go.
Yeah, I'm always scared of taking a great photograph.
Yeah, especially when you don't know why and how or when and what you did, and if it's just a coincidence, then that just sucks.
Yeah, I'm not very good at taking notes out in the field. I have to say, I have kept notebooks in the past, but I just don't have the discipline really. And to be honest, if the negative is made in a way that allows me to go in the darkroom and then complete the vision, then it's just another step in the process. And yeah, I know I should be able to repeat it all. And by and large, I do manage to repeat stuff. And I find it's because I use so few different materials, really, that makes it a bit easier. And I just kind of remember stuff. But certainly in the early days, I tried to do some film testing and, determining your proper exposure index and where your blacks are and where your zone 4s and 3s are. And I've done all that stuff, and I've kind of given up now, really, to be honest. And I still use all that stuff, but in a much simplified version. So I'm a bit of a don't know what the word is. I'm not very disciplined when it comes to taking notes and working in that kind of systematic way. People produce all these lovely field notes for how you're going to develop the film. And I do actually, having said that, I on a trip to World War One battlefields 2 or 3 years ago, you have to shoot in the conditions sometimes that you're presented with. And I didn't want to go to these World War One battlefields and not come away with some pictures. And the project kind of developed as I was there for the 3 or 4 days with a friend. And but the contrast range was quite extreme. So on a number of those, I did find myself in the evening taking the film out of the dark slides and putting them in boxes marked up for pulling the development back a bit to try and control the. Control the highlights. So that's the benefit of large format photography. You can treat individual images. So that's about as systematic as I ever get, is maybe separating or making a note on either on the dark slide itself or the film holder, or in a notebook, saying, actually, this picture I've just made, I need to just either use a compensating developer or cut back on the developing time, and that's about as far as I go when I'm in the field with note taking. Silence.
So we're processing
my words of wisdom.
Well, I think this is a good time to give Svein a proper introduction. And and I've got my my notes in front of me that Andrew has written for me on this, right. And it says that Svein is a notable photographer from somewhere in one of those Scandinavian countries. I don't know which one. They're all the same.
Sounds like something I would have said.
Funnily enough, I think you did. So now that we know that where Svein is from exactly, then something else has come into my mind as well. That Svein is he was originally the host, and now he's a co-host of a podcast called Viewfinder Vikings, which he co-hosts with Ian Barnaby Nutt, and it's a very interesting podcast because it's very different from most podcasts that are out there, because it's very much project driven, and it's a very interesting listen, and both Andrew and I have guest starred on his podcast in the past, and I do actually hold Svein partially responsible. I think is the best phrase. It's partially Svein's fault that Andrew does this podcast. Because I remember listening to Andrew when he went on there, and he was talking about large format, and he sounded very knowledgeable. And he
little did you know.
Exactly, yeah. I was thinking,
that's because he was in my company.
That's it, exactly. So as a result of enjoying that particular episode, that was one of the reasons why I got in touch with Andrew. And so Svein, it's great to have you on the show, and perhaps you might want to just give our listeners a bit of a idea about who you are and how you got into this large format thing.
Sure. Well, firstly, I can say that I sort of prepared for the banter in this episode, so I brewed myself a cup of Lipton Yellow Label. And so now I felt like I was ready for the Sweden stuff, but I'm actually from Norway, the country in between England and Sweden, or maybe that's Denmark. I don't know. I started with photography very late. I was probably 33, and now I'm 38. I started with digital. I started with sport.
I'm sorry, Svein. You just if you can just go back a few seconds, if you could, we just lost you there. We got up to the bit about you being 38.
Okay, well, I started in sports photography, with digital. And then my photography interest grew from there, and I discovered that film wasn't dead. And that sort of film, or the analog process, was sort of like the answer I was looking for, because I felt like my digital work was just, I mean, I was watching YouTube tutorials, and I was buying these post-processing classes for hundreds of dollars, and for hours I was doing luminosity masking and compositing in Photoshop, and it felt like there was nothing. If you just took the image in a general direction of what I wanted, and used an aperture that wasn't sort of crazy, you could just fix it in post, and so I was a digital artist, or I was a Photoshop photographer. I didn't feel like I was a photographer, and the part of being in the photographic process in the field was more. So when I discovered a way where it was much harder to do corrections, and also gave a look that I wanted, and I remember scrolling through Instagram and just seeing this, maybe one of 50 images just stood out, and when I clicked on them, they always had a tagline of either Ilford or Kodak, and well, yeah. So that made me jump into the whole analog world, and I haven't looked back since. And of course, started buying gear like everyone else, and I bought a 4x5, a Calumet monorail, and of course that's the worst camera you can start off with.
No.
If you just let me finish the sentence, Andrew. When you want to go on trips in the field, and you want to do large format, maybe a steel monorail is not the best choice. That I should have said that, but I suddenly loved the experience, and after a few years, I bought an Intrepid, and I had some experience with. I bought a Shenhao and sold it again, and I had 6x17 backs for it, and I sold those, and I had a 90mm, and I sold that, and so I sort of ended up paring down to this one kit in large format that I use the most, which is like a normal lens and 12 holders and a field camera. So I don't shoot large format every time I go out, but one of the processes that I'm currently in is scaling down on the medium format and 35mm, and sort of hoping that I can go more into large format in all my projects, and just basically do that and keep the medium format for family and for snapshots and for trips where it's not appreciated if I just walk away for 2-3 hours to take one picture with a large format camera. So yeah.
So you do a lot of sports and a lot of digital photography professionally and such, but what kind of photography do you do when you go out there with large format?
Well, I try to be in the category of fine art, although I don't know what that is, but I don't think I fall in the other categories, so I must be in that one. So that's how I look at it, because it's not landscape per se, but I don't know. So, but I am a quote unquote professional photographer in the sense that I have a business and I am a freelancer for newspapers, and I do school photography, and some real estate photography, all on digital. But I sort of have this side gig where I try to do art, and that is on film and analog processes in darkroom and such.
Well, one of the big reasons why we wanted to talk to you is for just regarding the podcast that you do. It is very much talking to people about projects. Projects are something that is very, very close to you. And whenever we've had conversations offline, you've sort of pushed me. Am I doing any projects at the moment? And I say, no, I don't do projects. And you say, well, you should. And I know I should. And you're quite right. And certainly the episode we did with Alice Tomlinson was quite revealing for me for the first time about projects, because I remember looking at her photographs, which are good photographs in their own right, but it was like when she won Sony World Photographer of the Year a few years ago. Initially, you tend to focus on the main photograph of a piece of work, and you look at it and think, well, is that one of the best photographs that's going to be here this year? And you can question that. And sometimes you can see a photograph that individually is quite amazing, but it's by itself. Yet where she won that award was because of a body of work, and it was part of a project. And when you start to look at that body of work and you listen to Alice and you read what she said, then those words and whether it be written or what she said, start to infuse themselves with the rest of the project, and it then becomes you start to think, wow, this is an amazing piece of work, because everything hangs together. It's not one photograph; it's a body of work, and I now understand that. And but that's would that be a fair way of representing what projects mean to you?
Yeah, that's what I think too, and. The submerging in one topic or one idea, and just sort of seeing where that goes, and keeping the advice from Borut in mind about that the whole process is a part of the art. So that's what I'm going to do from now on, because I felt that he spoke directly to me, and because I've been very goal driven in my projects, I need to see some result before I can sort of go further. But that's the wrong way around. I should just this is my project, and this is the images that came out of it. And when I feel finished about it, then I move on to the next idea. And you're right with the interview with Alice. I heard that too, and I also was taken back by, like, she couldn't remember what lens she was using, and sort of that just blew my mind. I'm so technical, or I was so technical that was my first question, because I loved her images, and I was wondering, I wonder what kind of lens. So that's just being stupid, because that's not seeing the project for what it is. And so those interviews that you've had with Alice and others, and now Borut, have slowly made me sort of not a better photographer, but it's probably a better photographer in the sense that I now focus on the right things. And so I certainly understand what you're saying, and I think you're correct in your thought process there.
I think your goal-driven side probably comes from the fact that this is your business as well, isn't it? Not the large format side at the moment, but the having to have deadlines and having to have results, because your income depends on it. And yeah. I suppose it's about putting your head in a different place. And you're right, Borut was very helpful there. And you've got to almost switch that goal orientation off. And if I say go with the flow, that sounds awfully wishy-washy, doesn't it? But not beat yourself up too much, because there's nothing quick and hurried about this generally, anyway, unless you're using a handheld 4x5 camera. But generally speaking, if you've got a long-term project in mind, then it's something that you may never finish, or you may come to a point where you pause it and put it on the back seat.
Yeah,
and then you have to think, well, are there words that might go with this? Am I trying to express a feeling I have about this idea or this place? Or is it just the aesthetics that are drawing me to it? Because that's fine as well. There's no right or wrong reasons why we photograph things. It's all very, very personal. But I think it's very easy to beat yourself up over it and start putting undue pressure on yourself.
Yeah, and for instance, I have this idea about a project photographing all the stave churches in Norway, and that will take me at least 10 years, I guess. Yeah. And I haven't photographed one of them so far. So it's a long way.
How long's the project been running?
10 years.
I've been thinking about it for almost a year now, and but that and I keep sort of stopping that project because I know that if I have 2 days or 1 day to travel to this church and photograph it, it's going to be not the greatest photograph of that church. If it's overcast or blue skies, or you never know. So, but that's sort of thinking about the project in the wrong way, because that's preventing me from actually doing the project, because I'm waiting for the perfect whatever, and still, if everything is perfect, I'm not going to create a better photograph than the 50 local photographers that live around that church. But the thing that I will have that they don't have is the collection, is the project. It's about the journey for me, the thought process, the year I was thinking about it, the traveling all over Norway, photographing those stave churches. I don't even know if that's ever been done by one photographer. So I just needed to sort of switch my brain off the end result, the goal orientated, result driven thinking, because it's not that important, and the importance is the completion of the body of work. And if at the end of that, when I have 2 or 25, I've done all of them.
Sorry, Svein, we just lost you again for a few seconds.
Oh,
when you have that body of work, and then I think that was a bit where we lost you.
Okay. Yeah. When you're done photographing all the churches, you've aged 10 years, and you then know, maybe you have a clearer picture of if you're going to have. Maybe you have audio with this exhibition, or if this is only a book. Will there be written words? Will you write them? Will maybe an historian write the words, the accompany your pictures? And so I can sit here and think about all those things, and I can plan about all those things. But until I actually start the photographing and the driving and seeing, for instance, the first image that I do of one of the churches where the weather was horrible. So why, or what do I do then? How can I implement that picture into the story without having to go back on a different day? And so.
I mean, I'm just thinking about that as a project, and it seems to me that is it's almost like the ultimate goal-driven project, because you've got a finite number. You've identified that you want to try and get all of them. So, for me, I mean, I don't understand how you can possibly make that as a project and not have it goal driven. But the other thing, that just listening to you there, I think to myself, well, is this project even is it capable being achieved. And the other part that comes onto there is, does it matter? And yeah, because you could argue this project could just exist in your head, and you think about it, and that's good enough.
Yeah, and I don't think the project is necessarily goal driven, but there can be a goal to the project. There can be an end result. I don't think that's a wrong way of looking at it, but as long as it's not the number of images that are driving me, it's sort of the experience and the journey and how, if I take one image next week and the last image in 9.5 years, you can also see the journey of me in those images probably. And so in some ways, all projects will be goal driven in the sense if there is a result. But I see your point, and that's also a important thing to think about. Maybe not think about necessarily the end results now, but let that also evolve as you do the project.
I think you can. When I say you, I mean one can. You spend so much time with angst-driven thoughts about these sort of things. What struck me most about what you've just said is if this project takes 10 years or however long it takes, the end result, there's a goal there, but actually it is the journey, and I think that's what strikes me, and I think that's the way Borut is changing his approach to photography. It's everything he does in that pursuit of the ultimate image, it all hangs together to put him in a better place, to help him grow as a person, as a human being, and develop his sense of how he understands his relationship with the world around him. And you can call it the journey if you want that you're on. And you'll probably learn stuff about yourself. You'll probably learn something about the cameras you're using and the equipment. You may well turn up and you think, well, actually, you thought the weather was going to be doing this, that, or the other, and it's completely different. But actually, that could well open up other creative opportunities for you to shoot in a way that you weren't planning to. So I don't think there's anything really as bad weather. Really, I think you can probably make what you want of it as you arrive, but the whole process, can be very ritualistic, and that's what Borut was talking about, wasn't it? In terms of, the preparation, the thought processes, the journey you're on physically in the car. Yeah, and it's a very mindful, almost meditative process. The whole thing can be, and I think that's great. And to be honest, even if you come out at the end of it with work that you never do anything with, I think it's been, for you, it's been a really worthwhile exercise.
I agree. And also, if I imagine myself having a 11-hour drive just to shoot that one church, the quote unquote old me would just sort of cover all my bases. I would have 4 cameras. I would have all my sheets loaded, and I would do all angles because I knew that I wasn't coming back here. And so that's also sort of the wrong way of doing it, because now I feel like I'm looking forward to that journey and reflecting on the way there and thinking about, maybe I can think about the weather, and I can, but the main goal is to sort of open up to what happens when I'm there. And like Borut said in the interview, that if you end up with not taking any images, or if you break all your glass plates on the way there, that's just life. You just let it. You don't get upset. You don't sort of let it control you. You just sort of deal with it. And
you recognize the emotion and you own it. That's effectively what you're saying, I think.
Yeah.
You don't let the emotion take control. It'd be very easy to say, right, that's it. I'm done with all this. I'm going to move to digital photography.
Yeah, and sort of trusting yourself and trusting your gear, and not sort of. I know that even if I brought like a medium format camera just in case, even if I did that and the large format breaks and I have to use the medium format, I can't put those images in the project anyway, because sort of that would mess with my head sort of. So yeah, but that's just an example, and I have like 10 or 15 of those projects, some of which I'm in the middle of, and some of which I haven't begun yet. And so that's in a sense, that's why I feel like I'm project driven, and that's why I like the podcast to be project driven, and interview folks about their projects, and sort of sharing that sort of thing. And I feel like the podcast is supposed to be sort of like, if you find the person I'm interviewing interesting, you keep listening, or if you find the projects interesting or the thought process interesting, you keep listening. But there's no sort of like, we don't read emails, we don't have a standard thing. So if you listen 5 minutes and you don't like the subject or the person, then you don't listen anymore, because there's nothing to miss about that episode, and you can just try the next one and see if that resonates better. And as you grow, maybe you can go back and listen to that guy you really hated and his nonsense, and then see if maybe you've changed and he was right all along.
You mentioned that you have several projects ongoing, and I'm just wondering how you actually manage that, because do you find that sometimes some projects overlap with each other, and if they do, how do you deal with that situation?
I don't have any projects that overlap, I think, but I can have projects that are sort of similar in thought process or end result, and that sort of scares me a little bit. If I have two projects that I'm close to ending and both of them are going to be zines, then I sort of feel like I can't do both at the same time, and I have to slow down one of them, and that's just stupidness, I guess. But so I mostly it's very different projects in terms of locations and gear and thought process and timeline and end results. And some of the projects are idea driven, that I have this thought about something. The other projects are more like that I find something very interesting. For instance, there's an old postal road in my part of the country where the post service went twice a week from Bergen to Trondheim, and with sort of a boat across the fjord and then walking over every mountain, and then after a few hundred years they started to build like a gravel road, and along the way they sort of threatened farmers to feed the postal workers, and there's so many stories of robberies and murders and whatever, and that sort of that road fascinates me, but I don't have a end goal in mind, and I don't know what to do with it, but that I know that someday is going to be a project that I'm somehow going to photograph in some way. So it varies how I treat my ideas and my projects.
That sounds like one that, words, accompanying words. So when does a project need accompanying words? I think that sounds like one where words would be invaluable in terms of placing the project in some kind of context. Otherwise, you end up with a series of images that have very, very little meaning unless you know something of the story. So I think when words and pictures can come together, I think that's really powerful. Doesn't need to be that way, Doesn't need to be that way at all, but I think it can be. And I think don't be fazed by having lots of different ideas and projects. Take the mindfulness approach. Don't let it worry you. Just enjoy it and enjoy the journey. You know, I mean, that's easy for me to say. I don't have to make a living through photography.
Well, I don't actually make a living from
that side of it.
No, it's just a huge money drain.
Yeah.
So I don't even think about that aspect, and I don't even like that. I'm not that kind of guy that can sort of sell my own stuff, I think. So I just do the projects basically, and then if something changes about how I sell stuff, and if I start to sell stuff, I hope that I don't change the approach, because that's an easy trap to fall into if you feel like, well, this local town here probably wants to see an exhibition of those kinds of buildings, and then you end up looking at it as work. And yeah. Well, can I ask you a question in return, Simon?
Yes. Sure.
What kind of projects are in your head, or what kind of what are you doing right now in terms of planning?
Buying cameras.
Right. That seems like the best project to me. Buy gear, then I don't have to take any photographs, because that's taking up my time.
If you don't think about gear or film, because I do that too, but is there anything like for instance a road or a type of buildings or a type of boats, or isn't there something you want to create into a project?
Well, there was something that happened when we a couple of shows back when we had Peter Defty on, and he did something where he took effectively abstract shapes in the environment in cities and towns, and he then created letters from them. And I thought that was just a really, really good thing to do. And at the time, I was quite fired up, and I was thinking, what, I'm going to do this. And like most things, I then completely forgot about it. So thank you for putting that one back into my head, because and actually that's thinking about it. And this is probably something I also won't do. And it doesn't really lend itself to large format, I've got to say. Is about all the things around the home that I could create. That A to Z or A to Z for our American listeners. That's got to be a lot more doable actually than walking around a city taking rooftops and lamps and things, trying to get an arches, just to kind of get the right kind of shape so you can manipulate into letters. But whether that to me doesn't sound like it's got a great deal of worth compared to like the stuff that Peter was doing and the work that you're trying to create as well. But sometimes that isn't really the point of a project, is it? It's about doing something, and then it's that journey, and you learn things when you do a project, because it forces you to think in a certain way, doesn't it? I guess, and like a lot of constraints. If you've got to do something in a certain way or whatever, then it makes you think differently about the way that you're taking your photographs, and forces you to do things in a certain way that you might not necessarily be used to doing.
Do you have to, and this is a kind of rhetorical question I'm throwing it out there, does there have to be a point to one's photography, or not? Does there have to be a point?
No. I don't think so, and I think the ones that let go of that idea is the ones that probably finds themselves faster, I guess.
I don't know. I don't know. We're talking about projects, and some folks listening might think, well, this is all very worthy, and I've got to. You've got to have a project, and I don't think you do really. You can just pick up a camera, whether it's large format and just enjoy it. You don't have to be. You don't. But I think there's something that eventually takes us all over to think, well, actually, I probably in my head is saying, well, you should be doing something a bit more with this in terms of pushing you on and developing yourself. And I get sucked into that as well. And I think it's a reasonable thing, but don't think that you have to be, pursuing these goals.
Don't stress about it.
Don't stress about it. Yeah. Don't sweat it.
And if you really like the sort of technical aspects of photography, that can be sort of a project too. And
absolutely.
And it can be, you can turn it around and say, and if you look through all the images and you find that, for instance, all your images from that lens or that combo was great, then you can turn that into a project, and you don't have to necessarily photograph anything else, but you can create that into a zine and call the zine something that will give the viewers a hint of that this is all done with one lens, and you can also think about it in a sense that if you want to do that letter project, Simon, and at the same time embrace that you really like gear, you can maybe I listened to you talking about the two lenses that you brought on that trip. One, you like the end result, and the other, you like the experience.
Yeah.
And you can sort of, if you think that I want to do this letter project, but I also want to use a specific type of gear, you can sort of combine the interest. You can force yourself to do that project on with sort of one type of lens or one gear or one camera. So that I think that in all of the projects and all of the ways of doing photography are equally worthy. It's just that for me, I like the idea of a project because to me it makes more sense and it has more worth to me, either finishing or not finishing it, and I learn a lot more than I would do if I sort of went the other way.
Sometimes projects can sort of develop in a fairly unintentional manner, I think. I don't know about you. I find myself in the darkroom sometimes and I produce an image and I think, oh, actually, there's something here I could pursue further. And that's, and that could develop into something or not. But your projects don't have to be thoroughly well planned out in advance. They can kind of evolve, and I take heart from the great John Blakemore, who actually, Simon, I think I'm going to approach and see if he'll come on and talk to us. But John sat at home, I don't know when it was, 1980s, and looked across. He was bored one day, sat at his kitchen desk, and he noticed some daffodils in a vase for with our American and he noticed the way the light was catching these daffodils, and I think maybe at the same time there were some that were starting to be past their best, so he took some pictures, and I think probably at the time it might have been with his 35mm Nikon mat, or it could have been with his MPP camera. And then he left the daffodils to sort of die a bit, and took more pictures of them. And then he started arranging dead daffodils to make a composition of dead leaves and daffodils. And he combined that with very, very fine art print making. He played with tonality, played with tones. He then started looking at 19th century Victorian collectors of things, and how they would sometimes gather all these things together in a very artistic way, the things they're collecting. And he started arranging whole sets based around flowers and daffodils and photographing those. And this whole thing took on. He became obsessed with daffodils. And in fact, if you follow him on Twitter, he's now starting to photograph daffodils again, but this time with his digital camera. He's rediscovered his love for daffodils. But this started as just an observation on a table, and it developed into a very, very powerful set of darkroom prints of daffodils. And then he started looking at layers in still life of photographing the soil, and then how some found objects in the garden making double exposures, and then he started out in the wild. He was looking at moving rivers and how to capture energy within nature. And so these things developed, and they developed often from very, very small seeds. And it wasn't something he did a lot of thought about, but it kind of developed. And so and he did it all with one camera and one lens, which is even better. And I think he'd be a fascinating guest if we can get him on the show at some point. So projects can start from little observations, and take on a life of their own.
Yeah. Well, I know that we're quite short on time with Svein today, so I think that's probably a good place to start to draw things to a close. Svein, are there any other? Is anything else while we've got you that you think? Oh, we really need to talk about something.
No, I think we've the main thing that are going through my head these days are that what we just spoke about stressing down and about enjoying it, and if that's a project, then cool, and if it's other things, then that's okay too. So that's what I'm thinking about every free minute I have is how can I stress down about all my projects and be more like Borut. That's my goal.
It sounds like you're thinking about it way too much.
Yeah, probably.
That's the next stage, and of course there's going to be some people out there, and I've got to say I think I'd probably count myself amongst them that really if I haven't got a goal, I don't think I could actually do it. I think that's
interesting.
Yeah, and so. Yeah, there's absolutely more than one way to do a project, and because at the end of the day we're motivated differently, and I absolutely get where you come from. I understand how listening to Borut has affected you, and it's affected me as well. And but I'm not a project shooter, but I'm thinking that I probably would, at least for a first project, I would need a goal. Otherwise, it'll never get done. And yes, we can say, well, it doesn't matter if it gets done or not. Well, actually, it probably does, in my opinion, anyway. So it's a case of it's what works best for you. And when I say you, I'm talking about our listeners now. And if letting go is a good thing to do for people, then that's great. But it can also be a case of nothing gets done. So also different strokes, different folks, isn't it? Really. That's
a good point.
But anyway, on that, because I know that we can probably kick off another part of a conversation there. So, Svein, it's been absolutely brilliant having you on the show. How can people take a look at your work? What's the best way to follow the things that you do, both visually and audio-wise?
Well, I do have the podcast, the Viewfinder Vikings Podcast, where I interview other photographers or artists, and sometimes I do it with Ian, and sometimes I do it alone, and sometimes he does interviews alone, and we also do solo shows. But if we're talking photography, the main channel is Instagram. That's where I upload the most, and so that's just at Humberset Photo with a FOTO at the end, which is the Norwegian spelling of the word, and the Swedish, I guess.
I wasn't going to say anything.
Okay. Do you have any shout outs you might want to give?
Well, I have to give a shout out to Borut and to Ian and to Alice and to everyone else that inspires me to do the projects my way and not try to emulate everyone else.
I thought you were going to say everyone else who knows me then.
No, well, it's been great having that chat. Andrew, have you got anything else you need to get off your chest, or should we go straight to shout outs and things?
Well, it is kind of, yes, shout out. So I'd like to just draw people's attention to John Blakemore's website. I've just brought it up while we've been finishing the show. So johnblakemore.co.uk, and if you go to prints, you can see Tulip Still Life, Tulip Kitchens series, Early Landscapes, Rocks and Tides, Tulip Mania Wind series, Tulips Petals. Anyway, if you want to see photographs of tulips, check out, and fine art photographs of tulips, check out John Blakemore's website.
Okay. And so, Andrew, outside of this podcast, how can people keep up with you?
They can keep up with me on most social media outlets such as Twitter and Instagram as Warboys Snapper, and also mostly every couple of weeks on the Lensless podcast.
And I just remembered we should also, because we didn't say it, we put it into the notes in the last show, but we really do need to say it. If you haven't already worked it out for yourself, but the large format photography podcast Gathering in the Forest 2020, to give it its correct name, has been cancelled. And so we will do that as soon as we can, when things get back to a point where there's a level of normality. Who knows how long that's going to be, and what the new normal is going to be, and all of those things. So it will happen one day. We're going to stay optimistic. It will happen again. We will meet again, but it won't.
Don't know where. Don't know when.
Exactly. So there's that. I've got a shout out. I just want to give to Kate Miller Wilson, one of our previous guests. And that's just that, she did some amazing stuff recently by statically shocking photographs, which we touched upon. And now she's clearly got bored of doing that, and she's now moved on to wet plate. So head over to Kate Miller Wilson's Instagram page, feed, I should say, and you'll see that she's now doing wet plate, and she's putting up shots that she's not entirely happy with as well, and she's talking about, I've done this time now, and the one I've seen latest is she's speeding up the development process and getting better results for it. So you can follow along with Kate's progress on Instagram there. So it's well worth a watch, because her photographs are wonderful, as we already know. So for me, I can be found on Twitter as Simon For. That's For as in FOR. I'm on Instagram as Simon Forster Photographic. I have a website which is simonforsterphotographic.co.uk, where you can buy lens caps. That seems to be all I'm doing at the moment, is making lens caps for unfortunately not large format cameras, but some of the more obscure older SLR lenses for 35mm and some medium formats as well now.
But more importantly, rear lens caps, because they're the ones that are sometimes tricky to find, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. They're the rear lens caps. I'm actually just about ready. I've done a Penticon 6 body cap as well as the rear cap, which is just about to get launched. And you can, not the body caps, but the lens caps, you can get them in glow in the dark as well, which has got to be good fun. And you can hear me usually once a week on the Classic Lenses podcast as well. And I think that's something's going crackly in there. Hopefully it's not under this end. And that's pretty much it. So Svein, it's been brilliant having you on the show. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
That's it. And so that's it. So hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll be back in about a fortnight, so goodbye.
Bye. See ya.